Thanks, Drew. Well, thank you, everyone, for giving us a few minutes of your time. I'm going to push these back so I can walk around. You're all, Drew stole a lot of my thunder, and you're all sort of wondering what's Korn Ferry doing here. You know, we've heard a lot today about product, and technology, and platform, and channel, and brands. But what underlies all of that, what underscores all of that, the only reason that any of those things can succeed or fail is people. And it's the folks like you sitting in this room that are going to either succeed or fail with all the various strategies that are out there. So on behalf of my colleague Becky Steen, who is sitting somewhere, there she is in the back, we want to thank you for letting us come talk to you a little bit about what we feel is, if not the single most important, one of the top 2 or 3 things that any executive in the C-suite, CDO otherwise, has to focus on, which is talent. I think this quote says it all. For any of you who know John Jenkins at Pinterest, who's the head of engineering, this quote came, I think he said this last week in an interview he did, but his entire job is about talent and finding great talent and interviewing talent and understanding how to hire talent, because at the end of the day, it's not just the marginal difference that can make a product execution or a design or a customer engagement successful. It's the only thing that will make it successful. Technology isn't going to win the day alone. People are going to win the day. So what we want to talk to you about a little bit, and what I'd like to talk to you about for a little bit, is what makes a successful talent strategy. How do you think about a talent strategy? How do you design a talent strategy? And then what can you do to make sure it's successful? And as Drew alluded to, we're actually not here to sell Korn Ferry, although we'd like to. But one of the things that's really important is to make sure that as folks who are thinking about talent, or hopefully thinking about talent on a daily basis, you understand that there are resources out there, there are partners out there like Korn Ferry who can help you through this and think about it. So what many of you know Korn Ferry as is an executive recruiting business, correct? What most of you probably don't know is that nearly 50% of our revenue comes from a whole other side of our business, which is on the consulting side. And the entire consulting arm is focused on the development of talent strategies, aligning talent strategies, and all the things that go with human capital. Truthfully, the only thing we don't touch on the human capital side are benefits and comp. That's for other folks. But the goal of Korn Ferry and what we're trying to do, especially in the digital world where talent strategies are so critical, is we're trying to align a business strategy with a talent strategy. So you guys develop the business strategies. You pick the technology platforms. You pick the channels. You pick the marketing stacks, the marketing software, the sales software that you use. But then you've got people who have to execute it. And how do you know that you have the right talent strategy to execute the business strategy? How do you know that the talent strategy is aligned with the business strategy? And the answer is you interview a lot of people. You get recommendations from other people. And you look at past performance. Because I say to you, hey, Jim, Joe's a great guy. You got to hire him. Great. I need a Joe, so I'll hire Joe. But what we've learned, just like you've learned also, is that data is an important part of talent. And yes, a lot of what we're doing is on the data side. So we're looking at data about talent, about performance, that can help benchmark organizations within an industry, and generally speaking, to help you understand, before you go out and make hiring decisions, how to create and develop and design a talent strategy so that you can go out and get the best people and provide greater insurance around success. So there are lots of different things that we can talk about. I don't want to bore you with the presentation. What I hope to do is make this a little bit more of an interactive discussion and open it up for questions a little bit earlier and not take too much of your time. But the truth is that talent development and the life cycle of talent development is everything. And it really comes in 3 shapes. And this is a busy slide with lots of information on it. But it comes in 3 forms. You first have to design a talent strategy, the same way you design your business strategy. What are you trying to accomplish and why are you trying to accomplish it? And then you have to build it. And building a talent strategy comes with engagement and development and retention, things that make the high quality people that you want to hire stay with you and execute to their greatest ability. And then you've got to acquire those people and attract them when you need to fill in gaps. And that life cycle of talent acquisition is what makes up a core talent strategy. And it's no different than when you sit down in budget meetings. It's no different than when you prepare for strategy meetings and you're talking about what you're going to do next week, how you're going to sell more products, sell more services, how you're going to deepen or broaden your relationships with customers if you're a SaaS provider. It's the same thing, but this is for talent. This is all around designing a strategy that helps you do your job better. We believe, knowing the data we've looked at and looking at the data that we've seen, we believe that a well-designed talent strategy can have an incremental effect both on ROI and on sales. We know it, we've seen it. Retention rates are higher, engagement rates are higher. Everything about performance is driven up if you can design the right strategy and hire the right people, because in the digital world in particular, past performance does not mean future success. It doesn't, because one of the things that we're also working on at Korn Ferry and thinking about, we'll get to the Chief Digital Officer role in a second, but one of the things that we're also working on is this whole idea of what is a digital executive? And you guys are living it every day. You're defining it within your company every day. And the question becomes one of a native digital executive versus a going digital executive or a digital immigrant. And there are different characteristics. There are cultural characteristics. There are expectation characteristics. There are different things that define different executives. And understanding your organization and what your key business objectives are and what the cultural objectives are, that will help you think about both designing and hiring the right talent. Because again, past performance does not equal future success because the cultural issues and the business objectives are different. But if you can design a strategy, a business strategy, design a talent strategy that aligns with it, you will improve the hiring rates and the retention rates and the way that you attract talent to your organization. It's the most critical thing we believe that you do. But one of the things that was mentioned earlier about chief digital officers is, are you guys going to exist 3 years from now? What is the nature of the role and what does it really do? Is it transformational? Is it an evangelist role? Does it have a P&L? I think it was mentioned at the beginning of the day today that one of the key successes for a CDO role is to have a P&L. How many of you in the room actually have a P&L, a direct P&L? Of the people who are here, less than half. I'd say less than a quarter. And so the role is evolving. And I think with your successes and your trials, you guys are the group of people who are leading the evolution of the role. And as you think about the CDO or not CDO role, it doesn't mean that the skill sets that you are developing, nurturing in your talent organizations, the skill sets that you have and bring to an organization, it doesn't mean that those skill sets aren't going to be relevant tomorrow. The question is whether or not it's in the title or bound up in a title called Chief Digital Officer. It could be a corporate development person. It could be a different role. Someone alluded to earlier that it might be the path to the CMO role or even the CEO role. The CEO of the future might be the CDO. But what's interesting is there's still a tremendous amount of confusion or debate in the market about the future of the CDO. And I think that's one of the great things about these kinds of conferences, bringing the ideas together so people can share best practices. Because again, most of you probably don't define your successes and failures or challenges by the title. You define it by what you're able to accomplish and what your purview is within an organization. And again, that's what's inherent in a talent strategy. If you have the right talent strategy, if people are clear about your objectives, your business objectives, and your talent objectives, the rate of success increases. So we are doing some research about born digital versus going digital executives. And as I alluded to earlier, there are a whole bunch of characteristics that are emerging that differentiate the two. So as you're thinking about hiring or moving on, we talk a lot about leadership characteristics, culture, values, things that are motivational. We talk about derailers, in a digital native versus a going digital executive. What are the key derailers? What are the types of things, what are the types of cultural issues, business challenges that would cause them to fail or provide a higher probability of failure? We're looking at those from a statistical perspective. We're looking at competencies, and the competencies, interestingly, tend to be more similar than they are different, but nonetheless, when you're hiring, understanding the competencies is important. Leadership characteristics. There are different kinds of leadership styles in each of these executives. Experience, motivators, what drives their career, where do they want to go next? These are all the kinds of questions that are inherent in these two very different kinds of executives that are now converging very rapidly on your world. Because as you're thinking about building your staff, your teams, as you're thinking about designing a strategy around your business objectives. These are the issues that become critical when you're thinking about building an organization, especially organizations that you've got to build pretty quickly. And by the way, these are also things that should be inherent in your thinking as you think about what you do next after you move on from your current roles. The other thing we've done a lot of work on too, and this is more from a C-suite perspective, but just to give you an example of what the cost is of a bad hire. Making a mistake in the hiring category can really have a massive financial impact on an organization. And I don't know how much you've looked at this, but as we all know, we've seen this curve in a number of different analyses before. But the cost to do what you want to do from a technology perspective has dropped precipitously over the last decade and a half, 2 decades. But the value of human capital has risen dramatically. And that's the problem we're trying to solve for, or help solve for. If we can reduce the risk of hiring, if we can improve the retention rates, if we can improve the set of characteristics and variables around which people are designing talent strategy and hiring, we're only going to drive value and help drive more value to organizations. I'm going to breeze through this very quickly because it really isn't a critical slide, and I'm going to get to the next one. But just to give you an idea, if you think about a generic example of what a bad hire could cost, $3.5 million of hard costs, $3.25 million of hard costs, just when you add those basic things up. And then the analysis suggests that the actual cost of a mistake on a C-suite hire is 10 to 15 times the comp. So we're talking one bad C-suite executive could be as high in a mid-sized company, mid-cap, it could be a $15 million mistake. Mitigating that risk, and for you guys hiring your team, that might be a lot lower, but mitigating that risk and making sure that you save the time and the energy and the dollars that go into building a team, that's a pretty critical investment. We talk a lot about learning agility as well, and these are some of the other key characteristics that go into, we think, digital executives. You've probably all heard of it if you've worked with outside organizations before, if you've worked with business coaches before. You've probably heard a lot about various ideas around learning agility. But we think in the digital executives in particular, there are really 5 key characteristics around learning agility as we start to think about. There's mental agility, there's people agility, change agility, results agility, and self-awareness. And these are things in today's day and age that as you build organizations are really driving critical use cases and critical results for how you think about hiring talent. And it's risk mitigation. You think about how many of you as chief digital officers are also involved in deal making, whether it's partnerships, acquisitions, joint ventures, a lot of you. And during that process, you work with lawyers, right? You work with bankers, you work with accountants, you probably also work with strategy consultants, whether they be McKinsey, Bain, BCG, or some of the boutiques. When you think about why you spend those dollars, it's all around risk mitigation. It's all about mitigating the risk of failure in a deal. But yet during a deal process, during a partnership process, during an acquisition process, how much money, time do you really spend on human capital risk mitigation? Again, another really critical area, especially in the digital field, when you think about bringing digital teams, especially young, very agile teams, into your organization, think about the impact it could have. So, again, we talk about banking, legal risk, accounting risk, human capital risk, and mitigating that risk we feel is pretty important. But with a couple minutes left to go, I want to stop talking and sort of open it up to questions. We obviously feel, and part of the reason we wanted to support Drew and the Chief Digital Officer Forum is the work you're doing is critical, and it's really leading the changes in organizations from the board level to the C-suite and on down. And understanding that the human capital component of that today is not just as important, it's more important than it ever has been. And we'd love to help, in any way we can, be partners on that front with you. So I'd love to open it up to questions if there are any for the last couple minutes that I have before you throw me out. Sorry, I walk around a lot because the light is right in your eyes up there.
Not talking about the senior level, but the entry level millennials.
Yep.
What is because they have a whole different work environment just in terms of in their head, advancement, what they're entitled to. What have you seen in terms of strategies that are working to retain these entry-level employees?
You can see it from a lot of different perspectives. I mean, a lot of what we're seeing on a retention side I'll give you an answer from sort of 2 perspectives. One is it's cultural. right? You build cultures in an organization that are more receptive to these kinds of millennials and their working styles. More casual environments, flexible hours, so FaceTime is less important. Much more technology built around sort of groupthink and agile similar techniques to agile develop environments where they can work from home and pieces of projects can be worked on depending on which piece of the organization. So there's a lot more organizational catering, and I use the word catering, but carefully, going on to try to appease the needs of these executives, the flexibility, the fast pace, those kinds of things. I think the other thing from a more senior perspective, as you start to build and work with these millennials that you can think about too, is your own expectation. And so, I sort of look at it and say, I expect to hold these people for 18 months. Because if you're not going to be able to grow fast enough or provide what they want, they are going to leave. So unlike folks from my generation who might have slugged it out a little bit longer or put in more years into an organization, we look at resumes and backgrounds today of sort of mid-30s to mid-40s executives who are prepared to step into the CEO role or the senior C-suite role at bigger organizations. It is highly likely that in today's world, the expectation is those folks will probably have had at a minimum of 6, maybe close to 8 to 10 different jobs by the time they hit 37 to 45. Totally different from a half a generation or a generation and a half ago. So it's balancing those two things that we see with millennials. The expectation on the leadership side and the cultural and organizational design side to help them sort of foster the kind of culture that they're looking for. And still trying to get the best out of them.
Hi. Yes, the question I have is about the emergence of these roles and titles and how you're tracking them. I'm assuming at some point there's a tipping point in which you notice that there is either a role being developed and or a title has emerged as something that people either are looking for or, and where for you in your consultancy do you see that tipping point and you start to actually proactively name and create a slide against, let's say, a particular title like a chief digital officer?
It's a great question. I think that what we're seeing is that, and as you guys probably also know, there's a tremendous amount, in the digital world in particular, there's also been a tremendous amount of title inflation for a long period of time. So one of the challenges that we have in terms of identifying executives and identifying talent is on what the title they hold or the last title they held really meant. Because they could have been the executive vice president of product at a startup company, but that really doesn't translate to the executive vice president of anything. So we're balancing the title inflation, and what we've got to do is actually drill down and look more at roles and responsibilities, accomplishments. So when we talk to executives about resumes in the digital world, it's less about title and it's more about how you articulate what you've accomplished, how you articulate key success factors or key successes during your role or tenure during a particular or at a particular organization. So what we're trying to do is strip out the idea of title. The idea of title is we find is really generated more by an organization's need to define something. So the chief digital officer title emerged not because there is always a pure need for a chief digital officer, but it defined a strategic role within an organization where many, especially larger organizations, needed the ability to talk to the internal constituency, the internal groups, and say, here is someone who is responsible for our digital activities. Sometimes it was with a P&L, as we discussed. Sometimes it was without. Sometimes it's someone who's more of an evangelist. Sometimes it's someone who's more externally focusing, talking about what the organization is doing on a digital front to bring partnerships in, things like that. There is a tremendous amount of, I don't know that there's a technical term, but squishiness in the title. And so I think what we try to do is focus less on title and focus more on actual accomplishments, roles and responsibilities, successes and failures. That's really where you're going to get the greatest insight about an executive, not the title. Organizations develop titles to fill a particular void. Personally, and we've begun to see this and talk about it a lot more, we do see the title of chief digital officer evolving, especially in media companies, where do you really need a digital person and a traditional person? Media is media, and you're really talking about channel and technology execution. So there's an evolution. I mean, there's a thought that the chief digital officer really morphs into more of a corporate development officer that has a broader set of responsibilities over partnerships, channels, things like that. Some organizations skew digital more towards marketing. Others skew it more towards execution on the partnership side. So some of it depends on the organizational initiatives underway. Great. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate you letting us talk to you a little bit about Korn Ferry.